What's up, guys? It's your man Donovan Sharp, and welcome to this episode of The Sharp Reality. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Donovan_Sharp. You can also visit thesharpreality.com anytime to check out other episodes of TSR, which can also be found on YouTube by doing a search for Donovan Sharp, as well as iTunes and SoundCloud. If you'd like to support the show without putting a dent in your wallet, all you have to do is bookmark the Amazon link on the right-hand side of our homepage and do all your Amazon shopping through that link. And of course, you can also leave a little something in the tip jar at the bottom of the page. Last June, which was the summer of 2016, ESPN released their most anticipated documentary in their critically acclaimed 30 for 30 series entitled OJ Made in America. It was directed by Ezra Edelman, who won this year's Oscar for that documentary. And it was definitely well-deserved. Now, even though it's been over 20 years since the trial of the century, the O.J. Simpson saga, the O.J. Simpson story is still one of the most polarizing and talked about stories to this day. For those of us who are old enough to remember the Simpson trial, it was everywhere on television. People talked about it in barbershops. We talked about it in class. I think I was 16, 17 years old at the time. People talked about it at grocery stores. That story engulfed the entire nation for over a year. Now, for my money, OJ Made in America is the final word on all things O.J. Simpson. There have been many books written about it. There have been many articles written about it. There have been documentaries done on OJ. I think there was a short miniseries on FX called The People versus O.J. Simpson. OJ Made in America, to me, again, for my money, is the very best and most thoroughly comprehensive and complete documentation and chronicling of the life and times of O.J. Simpson. It thoroughly and completely dissects every element from his life, from his humble upbringing in the San Francisco Bay Area, to his stardom on and off the football field, to his murder trial, and now to his current stay in Lovelock Correctional Facility here right down the road in Nevada. Now, early on in the documentary, which was a little over 8 hours long, was broken up into 5 parts, it became very clear that red pill truth was confirmed at every turn. So today I'm going to point out three of the most obvious red pill truths that the O.J. Simpson saga jumped out to me. So let's go ahead and get started here. Number 1. Men hate on other men who live better lives than they do. Throughout the documentary, the underlying theme that was prevalent in all of Ezra Edelman, the director's interviewees, was the fact that his, quote, whiteness was the main reason for his downfall. Men after men, male after male, said things like being a sellout cost him. Also, they used to say things like, I knew he was lost. And these were some of the things said by some of his closest friends and people who followed his life. This was a little more than men being envious of the life that Simpson lived. OJ had it all, guys. He had money, he had looks, he had an endless supply of women, and a trophy wife to boot. Now, while famous black athletes such as Lou Alcindor, who later became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Cassius Clay, who of course later became Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, Hall of Fame running back, while all those guys were fighting for civil rights back in the 60s, Simpson was living it up in Hollywood and had no intention of getting involved. And he made that very clear, and it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Now, this isn't to say that these athletes didn't have a gripe in terms of being perturbed with OJ's choice to sort of distance himself from the civil rights movement. Being put off by a young black athlete reaping the benefits of their hard work without having contributed much of anything himself is certainly understandable. But at the end of the day, guys, every man is in control of his own life and decides what he will and will not do. A lot of sports fans these days seem to have this idea that professional athletes have an obligation to speak out on social issues, but that's just not true. Just because LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul, and Dwayne Wade use their platforms to talk about these things doesn't oblige other athletes to follow suit. At this year's ESPY, LeBron, Carmelo, CP3, D. Wade, they did some sort of opening special at the ESPYs talking about the police brutality against African Americans. Just because they do it does not mean that every other athlete, black athlete, has to follow suit. sued. They did what they did because they chose to do it, and athletes who choose not to do it should not be chastised for it. People have always endorsed the idea that every man can do anything he chooses and be anything he wants to be. This is exactly what they fought for. Well, OJ made his choice, and because of that, he lived a much better life than they did, and it pissed him off, and every other black man who suffered during that time. So statements like OJ, quote-unquote, didn't know who he was, or he was in denial, they're dead wrong. OJ knew exactly who he was, and he wasn't in denial about anything. Further, he sure as shit didn't care about what people wanted him to be. He was his own man, regardless of what people said or thought about him. Any man with red pill knowledge these days acts much the same way, and as a consequence, we catch the same heat from other men like OJ did from other men back in his heyday. Number 2. The female rationalization hamster has always been around, guys. Female nature was front and center from the beginning to the end of this documentary. So I'm going to point out a few things. Number 1, projection. I'll tell you a quick story here about about a brief about one of the interviewees. Her name was Robin Greer. She's a post-wall blonde who was, one of Nicole's closest friends, and she laid bare her female nature for all the world to see. There were so many red pill nuggets to count from this chick, but one stood out to me was this statement. When she was talking to Edelman about why she thought OJ killed Nicole, she said, quote, "There was something about Nicole that was almost unattainable to OJ, something he couldn't quite control, and I think that was part of the attraction." Guys, I literally laughed out loud when I heard her say this. Those in the know, in other words, those who have red pill truth, we all know that nothing wets the panties of women more than a man who cannot be tamed, controlled, or kept. Female solipsism leads them to believe that, and we've talked about this before, they all think that sexual attraction is symmetrical. They constantly show their ignorance in these matters by describing what attracts them to men when talking about themselves or other women. I've touched on this in the past when I tweeted out a while back. I said something like, ask her what kind of woman she is, and she'll give you a blueprint of what kind of man she's looking for. So if you're on a date with a woman, or if you're on a meetup with a woman, and you ask her, so what kind of woman are you? Well, I'm strong, I'm independent, I'm disciplined, I'm self-assured. Trust and believe that's the kind of man she wants. This is something that women have been doing for eons. Robin Greer wasn't fooling anyone with that statement, at least not men who have red pill awareness. Women love men who are unattainable, and they project this attraction by defining themselves or other women in this way. I'll also add that she talked about being cornered by OJ several times, presumably for sex, but she says she never gave in to his sexual advances. Even if I hadn't seen the arousal in her facial expressions as she told this story, I still wouldn't have bought it. I would bet you dollars to donuts OJ probably fucked Robin Greer on more than one occasion. That's just all there is to it. The second the second part of female nature that was clearly on display is that women will always favor strength. The lead prosecutor for the Simpson trial was Christopher Darden. Marcia Clark got a lot of the headlines because she was the more experienced attorney, but Christopher Darden, he was the lead prosecutor. In the documentary, it said that the district attorney's office thought that putting another black lawyer against, the formidable Johnny Cochran would sort of even the racial odds in the trial. Now, by all accounts, Darden seemed to be a solid lawyer, but it was very clear from the jump that he was overmatched by Cochran and his legal dream team. This fact, guys, was not lost on the jury, which was incidentally comprised of 10 women and 2 men. Now, as most of us know, or as most of us know by now, the pivotal moment in the trial was when Simpson tried on the gloves, which at the time didn't come close to fitting. I'm not going to go into details in terms of what led to the decision in the aftermath. You can watch the documentary there. But when juror number 2 summed up the whole glove fiasco and what it meant to her personally, she once again confirmed more red pill truth. And I'm paraphrasing here. She said, quote, "I can't believe he did it." In other words, she can't believe that Chris Darden let OJ try on the glove. Then she continued. She said, "You let him play you. You were the weaker one, and you didn't have to be." And then later on, she said that she actually felt sorry for Chris Darden because he looked weak. Females pity weakness, but more importantly, they favor strength. That's always the way it's been, and it's always the way it will be. Darden had enough evidence to lock Simpson up for life, but because he wet the bed when the pressure was on, the female jurors looked down on him, which didn't help matters in their deliberation. Regardless of whether a man is a good guy or a bad guy, whether he has the truth on his side or not, if there's no conviction, if there's no strength, no confidence, not only will women not respect him as a man, but everything they stand for is looked at as a joke. Chris Darden was charged with prosecuting and subsequently convicting O.J. Simpson, and because he was clearly the weaker attorney, this clearly worked against him when they deliberated at the end of the trial. Another part of female nature that was fully on display is that females love being owned by violent men. Throughout the documentary, Nicole's friends and family members talked at length about how abusive Simpson was toward her and how possessive he was. And of course, there was all sorts of 911 calls and, pictures of her bumps and bruises. Listen, it made it clear that, the tales of his dubious dealings with his trophy wife were probably true. But here's the thing. This is the reason she stuck around for so long. No, I'm not saying she liked getting her ass kicked by her, 6'2", 210-pound or 215-pound ex-football star of a husband every other night. But I've said before that volatility and aggressiveness are both traits females are attracted to, whether they admit it or not. And I discussed this extensively in episode 31. A couple of the many examples of this particular truth that stuck out to me was when Nicole complained, quote, in one of her letters that OJ used to hit me when he fucked me, or when she told sort of a beta orbiter of hers after she had gone out with OJ for the first time on their first date. She says, "I think I like this guy," after she told him that OJ had been forceful with her and ripped her jeans. No, guys, it's not okay to beat your wife for no reason. And no, Nicole didn't think to herself, boy, oh boy, I hope OJ's in a bad mood so I can get my ass kicked and call 911 again. But excitement, whether it be terrified excitement or not, is still excitement. And no matter how much she complained to her friends and her family members, no matter how many times she called the cops, who more often than not didn't file a report at her request, she was always going to love OJ. OJ's abusiveness and volatility only deepened her feelings for him. Few things in today's sexual climate make more women loyal than the threat of violence. Being owned by a man who shows that he can and will resort to violence and being reminded of that on a regular basis turns women on. Nicole Simpson was just another in a long line of women who was no match for her biological programming, unfortunately for her. The third and final thing that stuck out to me in terms of red pill truth as it pertained to the life and times of O.J. Simpson is that alpha males always live the very best lives. O.J. Simpson was a bona fide alpha male through and through. And to add to that, he was probably a sociopath who exhibited all three dark triad traits on a regular basis, depending, of course, on the situations he found himself in. He took what he wanted without any apology or remorse. He could charm the panties off just about any girl he wanted. One woman actually described this phenomenon as being OJ'd. And it was clear when she said that she probably wanted to fuck him too, and probably did. The OJ saga is well documented. And before this documentary, the public at large probably thought they knew just about everything about his life and his trial, myself included, but I gotta admit that even I was surprised by a few of the stories that were told about him. So let's get to one of them that shocked the shit out of me. The first story was that O.J. Simpson stole his best friend's girl and made her his wife. The friend that he stole the girlfriend the girlfriend from, none other than A.C. Cowlings, the driver of the white Ford Bronco in the most infamous police chase in U.S. history. The story goes is that O.J. and his friend Joe Bell were on their way to some party in another part of town or something, and when they got to Marguerite's place, who was A.C.'s girlfriend at the time, O.J. instructed Joe to sit in the back seat so that Marguerite could sit in front next to him. Well, O.J. ended up marrying Marguerite. She had 3 of his children. But the fact that the man whose girlfriend he stole ended up as a ride or die comrade is what separates Simpson from most men. Look, dudes steal their friends' women all the time. It's not right, but it happens. But to then turn that man into your closest ally to the point where he drives the getaway vehicle for you as a fugitive of justice is extremely rare. There was also a story where A.C. Cowlings jumped in front of O.J. to shield him, I guess, from a friend who was pointing a gun at him, which was supposedly a joke. And he said, "If you want to shoot O.J., you gotta shoot me." Simpson's infectious personality not only affected women, but it affected men as well, and he was well rewarded with loyalty from both men and women because of it. Another story about O.J. Simpson that was sort of a footnote was that he claimed Nicole as his property before she even knew him. This was right at the end of part one. According to an acquaintance, O.J. was with a friend at an exclusive club in Hollywood when, of course, a drop-dead gorgeous 18-year-old blonde who was waiting tables caught O.J.'s eye. Not 10 seconds after she crossed their paths, he looked at his friends, pointed to Nicole, that's who the girl was, and he said, "I'm going to marry that girl." At the time, he was still married to Marguerite, but that didn't matter. He saw what he wanted, he claimed it, and he made it happen. This is what alpha males do day in and day out. Another part of OJ that exuded his alpha characteristics was his unbreakable frame. After he was acquitted for double murder, Simpson foolishly thought that he would just move back into his Brentwood mansion and be loved and accepted into the community as though nothing ever happened. Unfortunately for him, this was not the case. People heckled him at golf courses. They called him a murderer. They held up signs. They insulted him. Anywhere he went, he was ridiculed and loudly persecuted by just about everyone. But through it all, as a friend said, he acted as though he didn't even hear or see it. Guys, you can call this denial. You can call it coping. You can call it whatever you want. But the red pill truth is that OJ simply maintained frame. And look, I'm sure it wasn't easy. All right, and I'm sure there was a lot more happening beneath the surface than people saw as they hurled insults at him, but that's the point. No matter what's going on inside, you never let him see you sweat, and Simpson did not. Now, eventually he'd have to move out of the Brentwood house because the IRS, I think, seized his home. But no matter what people said to him or about him, his demeanor was as stoic as a statue, guys. This is the very definition of rock solid frame. Another part of OJ's personality that I was unaware of before this documentary was that he was actually instrumental in his own defense. Carl Douglas, who was one of the attorneys on Simpson's legal team, tells a story about how OJ took him aside after Douglas cross-examined someone from the prosecution. He looked at him right in the eye and said, "Wipe that spittle off your mouth." And Douglas obviously obliged. According to Carl Douglas, Simpson was in charge, and he made it clear very, very early on. He would tell his attorneys what to wear, how to wear it, which jurors to key on, and just about everything else. Simpson was a control freak to the highest degree. And the thing is this, guys, he probably didn't know anything about the law, yet he had no qualms with asserting his dominance over the men who literally had his life in their hands. Anyone who watched the trial and observed OJ, we mainly just saw him sort of sitting stoically and watching the proceedings, but little did we all know that he had complete control over his legal team and was pulling the strings behind the scenes. One might even argue that he had almost as much to do with his acquittal as his legal team did. Now, to wrap this up, of course, I'll ask the question, was OJ guilty? No, he was not guilty. He was acquitted by a jury of his peers. A better question would be, did he do it? Guys, you know he did it, I know he did it, and OJ knows he did it. All the evidence pointed to Simpson, and only Simpson as the killer. And anyone who doubts whether or not he killed his ex-wife and her friend, even before watching this documentary, is lying to themselves. People wanted him to be not guilty, and he wasn't. That doesn't mean he didn't commit double murder and get away with it. Which is exactly why this confirms yet more red pill truth. Guys, OJ was rich, which allowed him to hire a legal team that used the race card in the perfect city to do it in at the perfect time, just 2 years after the Rodney King incident. And he also happened to be the beneficiary of an obviously biased jury pool, one of which was a former member of the Black Panthers who stood in the jury box and raised his fist in declaration of Black Power after the verdict was read. Unbelievable. In addition to a seemingly inept prosecution, which of course was led by Christopher Darden and Mark Furman, who was a racist cop. Mark Furman was made the focal point by the defense. It was kind of the perfect storm that allowed OJ to get away with murder. Now, what does this all have to do with the red pill, you ask? Simple. Simpson should have been convicted, but he wasn't. Women should be attracted to good, honest men who don't abuse them and take good care of them while giving them respect and providing them with a good life. But they don't. What should be and actually is are two different things, and the O.J. Simpson saga shined a bright light on what most of us here already know. That does it for this episode of The Sharp Reality. If you have questions, comments, show ideas, or personal stories you want to tell me about, hit me on Twitter at Donovan_Sharp, or go to the contact tab on my website, thesharpreality.com anytime. Thanks for listening, guys. Talk to you next time.